I'm Brad.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thanks. And you?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, we have to meet this week as well.
Yes, that would be great. Are you back in Australia now?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I just got here late last week. So I'm all settled back into normal time, which is good.
Yeah, let me know when you have some time. We can chat.
Sounds good.
Hi there.
Hi, Emil.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Hello.
Hey, Brad.
Hello.
How are you? Hey, Emil.
Hey, Ola.
Hi, Andrea.
Hello. Nice to meet you. And
Nice to meet you too. Nice to meet all of you. Brad, I've met. Let's see. I think maybe Bruno's joining too. Let's see.
let's wait another minute.
Emil, you're in Stockholm, right?
No, I'm in Linköping.
Linköping. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
And yourself?
I'm usually in Stockholm. I happen to be in Lund today.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I was gonna help my daughter move. She's studying down here over the weekend, and our car
From
broke.
Stockholm to Lund. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Hi, Bruno.
hi.
Hey, Bruno. How are you?
Oh, hey, Brad.
Hi.
Good. You?
Very good, thank you.
Nice background.
Yeah, thank you. Are you gonna submit?
Yes, I am.
Nice.
Are you?
Yep.
You change the background for every meeting, kind of related to.
This one's because we're looking for early bird submissions, and the deadline was like, they're like, okay, we need some early bird submissions. You have a week. So
Okay.
it's not a lot of time to tell people. So I'm trying to tell as much people as I can.
Okay.
Great.
We should
About that,
definitely.
it needs to be in person, right? Brad?
I think so. Yeah, we're actually. I just asked that question. If there was a couple of questions, if one person can be virtual and the other one presenting. I'll get back to you. It's a good question.
I saw some statement that at least it's the intention is to have all presentations
In person, yeah.
physically or in person.
It's a tough date because KubeCon's so close. So, you're in Amsterdam and then you want to go home and then you want to go to the other side of the world. So it's a tough one to sell to people, including your wife.
Yeah.
Unless she can come. Well, maybe.
Exactly, yeah. But I think that's the key.
That's the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrea, where are you?
I'm in the UK,
Oh, okay.
in Wales, actually. Yeah. Not from the UK originally. So I'm Italian born. All right. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Just kick off the meeting so we can get started. So welcome to the CDEvents working group. Today is January the 16th. Yeah, we have a participant list. Feel free to add yourself to the participant list if you'd like to. I'll just put the link to the notes in the chat. And everyone has it. So we have a few things on the agenda today. just pushed up the test events proposal since you, Bruno and Ole are here today. So thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Just wanted to quickly review the action items for last week first. So the first one is a SDK Java pull request that was marked as need review. So there's some review comments from Jalander and myself. So I think it's back to Adam, the author, to continue review, to answer to the review comments. And yeah, I had a question how we're planning the migration for the SDK, but that's maybe something we can discuss with Jalander or Adam when they join. And the second point from last week was the Spinnaker RFC and whether we should have an ad hoc meeting. So I left a comment about that on the RFC itself. Yeah, I haven't heard anything from Ben whether he's organizing a meeting yet, but yeah, that's all the updates I have on that today. Unless anyone else knows anything more.
No, I haven't heard anything either. I talked to Jalander actually someday after that, but he didn't know of any meeting yet then either.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that. Quick question. Do we want to update the meeting notes on a yearly basis? So I can create an archive file for 2022 and update this link to be the running one. Or we can keep it a large file.
I believe that makes sense to actually archive it. We've done that previous years, I think, both for the SIG and the, at least for the SIG, but maybe for the vocabulary as well. So we keep it manageable.
Okay.
I agree.
Anyone against?
Of course, it's harder to search, but whatever. I think it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, we can include links to past years in
Mhm.
the ICANN.
And we will keep them on GitHub as well. So we have the notes synced to GitHub occasionally, maybe we should say manually. So of course we should have the old notes there as well.
Yeah, I can do that. Okay.
I was about to do that for the SIG notes, but maybe when you're on it, maybe you can do it for the SIG as well. Then if you're on that other note, if we're doing it for this, so we make it the same way. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can do both.
Perfect. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, that's all for the kind of initial logistic. So Ole or Bruno, would you like to discuss your proposal?
Sure. So just for the record, hi, I'm Ole. Bruno is we're at with the Test Cube project, and I've been in touch with Fatih and Brad at times, and we discussed the possibility to define top level testing events. I'm going to share some screen. Could you allow that?
Yeah, I think as long as I stop sharing, you should be able to, but let me know if not.
Yes.
I can.
Let me just, so I share the right thing here. There we go. Wait, I need to, this is the challenge of having, here we go. So, it's a work in progress, obviously. So what is it? Addition of top level testing related events to the CDEvents spec. And why? Because from our experience, testing is often performed kind of out of bounds or independently from CI/CD workflows. So I know there's already today in this continuous integration events, there are some test related subjects and predicates, but we've seen it's pretty common that tests are run kind of independently. So if you're like a load or performance engineer, you run these tests separately, or you might run security tests or compliance tests that you run kind of independently of your CI. Also, the possibility that, you know, people run tests manually or like in an ad hoc way, or if they are kind of reacting to other events, not specifically CI related workflows, you might be triggering tests from, I don't know, something happening in your cluster, or from Slack, or I don't know, from some schedule, or just some tester goes in and runs a test that they want to rerun. And also something we see quite often is with TestCube, and also I used to work at SmartBear, which is a testing company, is, you know, you run the same test multiple times simultaneously for, you know, either by purpose or not, but we might want to kind of provide some way to handle that or understand what's going on. And obviously this is inspired by the test related subjects and predicates that you already have under the continuous integration test events topic. So, and obviously, of course, we want to start very small. So I've started I'll open this in just a sec, like a proposal. I've just, you know, kind of worked off the format that you guys already have on GitHub, working with test case, test suite, and adding a test artifact subject, which could be like a video or a report, or, you know, a log or something that's kind of produced by a test. It really depends on the type of test that you're running. Where, you know, the fields in the corresponding predicate would provide, you know, a URL or a way to access that artifact. I think there's, I mean, there's, you know, I'm sure, as you know, there's a lot of things that come to mind when you, and we will try to keep it reasonably simple at this initial point. Maybe as one thing that we were thinking about, and I don't know if you have any strong opinions here, is if test executions should be a subject in itself, because the model is usually that you have a test case or test suite, when you run that, which creates an execution, which is a short-lived object, or, well, could be pretty long-lived depending on the type of test. And then that results in one or more test artifacts. And once again, this is to kind of separate between multiple executions of the same test, or, you know, as a test changes over time, you might be, you know, usually tests evolve and you have versions of tests, etc. You might want to kind of associate an artifact with a specific execution. So we didn't know how deep to go, so I kept it pretty shallow, or at least from our point of view. And then there's a document, a test events document. Let me just find it here. No, that's not it, sorry. Here we go. This is a fork of the repo. So where I've basically these three subjects. For test case, we've added fields, an optional type of test, severity, critical, low, medium, high, an optional review URL to access the actual test. This is, of course, tool dependent. Test suite, as before, is more a grouping of tests, so we kind of piggybacked to what you've already done there. And then test artifacts, which is describes an artifact. So there's a type of artifact. It could be like a report, video, image type. This was an enumeration. I don't know, I'm happy to obviously add things or remove. The format, which would be the content type, which would make it easier for a target system to know what to do with that actual artifact. And then URI references to those objects or artifacts. So, and then there are some events. I don't know how deep you want to go on this call, and I don't know what the process is here. So I guess wanted to throw this out there and see what your reaction is, and if we should open a PR, or if we should have a separate call, or if I should write some more, you know, background, or I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts around the process of moving this forward?
Yeah, thanks for that. I don't think we have any like very strongly defined process, because we are a small group. So we kind of discuss about things in meetings and or issues, and make PRs, and yeah, get them merged. That's pretty much the process, and especially I think it's very valuable if there is something like yourself and Bruno that are working in the test area and are proposing about things about the test. That's very useful. So from my understanding, are you proposing to move the existing test cases to a specific bucket, or is that yeah, so
No,
it's a test. Yeah,
I would still keep these events here that you have. These are to I guess it's a good question in the sense that is there a risk for we should maybe keep these two subjects aligned so they're not diverging from each other, but I still think it makes sense to have them because it's commented around tests, obviously as part of a CI workflow. But as I mentioned, I added it also just as a separate kind of high level category.
Yeah, and like a big difference, if I might just like add a few points. So for example, that artifact is more around test continuous integration, where you see artifact there means like a build was successfully done, where here test artifacts is more like the artifact of a test itself. So there's like a different meanings on these events. For example, in the other side, it's more about the deployment itself, whereas here it's more how to integrate your test events with other tools. The motivation for this was actually how to communicate in a synchronous manner with other components that want to either deploy or promote applications to environments based on things that happens related with tests. So, and that's why we are creating these events that are really more specific towards testing scenarios, where the other ones are more like focused on the continuous deployment.
Did that answer your
Okay.
question? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Emil. Sorry.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. Yes, I know that we have the build events today, which are like the only events apart from pipeline and the step events, which are kind of life cycle events, if you will, that tell something about something being scheduled and started and finished and so on. And for sure, one could think that anything that happens in a pipeline are steps in some way, and then everything could just be noted as pipeline steps. But at the same time, I know we have the build events there, so why not have test events at this as the same level? Then where to draw the line? Of course, it's hard eventually. So that's maybe one reason for me being a bit how should I say, not skeptic, but a bit I'm not sure how long we should take, how far we should go with defining specific types of actions that are taken in a pipeline. For sure, test is a general term, but then we have delivery, we have deployment, we have production, we have a lot of things. That's one aspect of it, and of course we should relate them to each other at least. So, I mean, there is a pipeline somewhere that has been executed, and if we execute tests, it should relate then to the pipeline execution, connect to it in some way. And then to the point of where to place this, these events we see now are in the continuous integration bucket, and for sure tests are performed within the continuous integration phase of a pipeline as well, if you will. But for sure tests can be done wherever, also in the delivery or deployment pipeline there could be tests as well. So I understand that there is a bit, it's a bit hard to categorize this kind of events into one of these continuous blah 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 events. So yeah, we don't have a crisp definition of what these buckets are supposed to, how they should divide the group of events, let's say. Yes,
Yeah,
I think-
random thoughts. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think for scalability, in my opinion, it makes sense to be outside the CI, because later on when we add more, that you could probably technically have a smoke test that runs in the CD space that would just make sure that the environment's ready or working as it should. So possibly for scalability, it might be better to have it in its own bucket.
But so you're thinking that maybe here just to have a more generic step in the continuous integration. So to your point, it might be as you said, testing could be done within pipelines and outside, and it could be confusing to have them, or it's hard to know how to slice and dice these different things. So because there are other things that of course could happen within scope of CI and CD that we haven't called, or that haven't been called out in the spec at this point, but they could be. For now, it's just test case. And here, you're thinking that, to your point, they should reference each other, and there could of course be confusion if I run a CI workflow with Jenkins or whatever. Should these events be triggered, or should these events be triggered, or should and should both be triggered, or should these, if these are triggered, should there be a reference to the pipeline as you suggested? I don't know. I don't have any answers. I understand. I agree that it's a bit cloudy.
Yeah, I'm a bit wary that having multiple test case type of events might generate confusion about which one to adopt. As I say, if I'm sending events, do I send the ones from the CI bucket or the one from the test bucket? I think these buckets were originally designed to, we're thinking about I guess compliance, because it's a large scope for CDEvents. So if you wanted to say, well, as an application, I'm implement CDEvents, I don't necessarily need to implement all the events in CDEvents, because that's not likely going to be the case for any system. So we could say, well, if I implement events in the testing buckets or in the CI bucket, or and that was I guess one of the reason for these buckets. But we have not actually defined yet any compliance policies or anything. So at this stage, they're just kind of a logical grouping. But I think, as Emil said, it's kind of hard to cut things, to separate them exactly. I mean, there is always going to be an overlap. Personally, my preference, I don't mind having a testing group, but I would then prefer to drop or move the existing test cases. It can be in the format that you propose into the testing events bucket, and maybe having some field, like you already have some fields for the type, I believe, or we could have an extra attribute to define whether there is a reference pipeline, CI pipeline, or so. That's something we can also add incrementally. We don't have to do it in the initial model.
And this is where the test execution thing comes on, because you might run, the execution could be in the scope of a pipeline, right? But it could also, sometimes you might run the test as part of a pipeline, but then sometimes you might run it as not as part of the pipeline, or so the pipeline is more related to the actual execution and not the test itself. So that's kind of where that dimension comes in, and that's why I was raising the question. I don't want to make it overly complex, but I also wanted to make it accurate. So it's there's always this kind of
my question there would do you have any use case or automation in mind for events associated to the test case definition or test suite definition? So would you have events like, okay, a new test case has been defined, a new test suite has been defined or has been modified? Because then you would have like 4 different subjects, right?
Yeah, I didn't add those deliberately because it felt like those were outside the scope of continuous delivery or continuous deployment. I couldn't come up with a scenario where those would be relevant. I mean, we can add, a bunch of, to your point, like predicates created, modified, deleted, kind of for test cases and test suites, but I couldn't, like in the context of CD, when would that be interesting? If this was like a test management thing, then definitely, right? Because then it would be interesting. But that's not saying, it's just saying that I didn't come up with them. That doesn't mean that obviously they don't exist. So if we can come up with scenarios where it would be relevant in this context of CD to know when a new test has been created or a test has been deleted, those predicates. Bruno, you were trying to say something.
Oh yeah, so I think that like one example is, I don't think it matters like if the test is running in the context of a CI/CD or like on our context. What matters like it's running and that event happened, so that's it, and then that's the event. And if, for example, if a test is created and somebody wants to have a component just execute any test that is created, for example, on a certain environment, if that's a use case, I'm not sure if that's like a very common one, but I mean, we can write the spec for it. I don't see an issue with that.
I also have a small comment there on the not executing it in a pipeline, as we talked about there. So I'm just wondering, or thinking about the scope of CDEvents itself, the whole protocol, which is intended to be a protocol for continuous integration, continuous delivery, deployment, and those continuous practices. Now, when we say we want to send events also in some kind of area where it is not really related to a pipeline or to a continuous something, we need to be just make it so we have a conscious decision there that we more or less allow for events, CD events, to be sent also on a, as you said, the notification from Slack or schedule or something else. I see it's of course relevant to use the same way of notifying these kinds of executions, regardless of if it's from a CI/CD system or if it's from a manually triggered execution or something else. But yeah, just so we're aware of that, if we more or less allow for that, then of course we need to also have that in mind when reviewing and when writing these kinds of documentation about these events, that they might not always be executed in that kind of context.
It's a good point. I agree. So it's a good point. The question is, how strict do we want to be?
Yeah, because if we would go there that way, we could say, of course, that, well, anything you deploy manually in a system could also then send the CD events for deployed, CD event deployed, or it's called artifact deployed event, and similar things. So where to draw the line then on when to send CD events and not?
Well, from my point of view, I think even if the pipeline is not automated from, it's not automated through like a pipeline orchestration engine, like Jenkins or Tekton or whatever tool, it's still in a way a pipeline. I mean, if you're going through software implementation and delivery, you will have like some kind of test that you execute in different stages. And even if that pipeline is not an automated pipeline, it's a kind of a process pipeline of a series of things that you execute. So in my view, I think these events, this manual triggering of events, as well as manual triggering of deployments and so forth, they belong to CDEvents. But yeah, so that's.
So yeah, I I think I agree mostly at least. So I mean, but with that statement, it would be more like CDEvents are events for, what should I call it then, software production.
Lifecycle,
Um,
yeah.
Deployment. So it's not just for continuous delivery and continuous integration then. So maybe the name then is slightly misleading.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, continuous continuous delivery is not necessarily automated delivery, though, I would argue. I mean, you could have continuous manual delivery. But I know that like effective continuous delivery best practices, you know, they go towards automating as much as possible, because that's how you can achieve like high frequency of deployments and, you know, good DORA metrics and so forth. But if you're doing things manually, you may still be doing continuous deliveries, but you won't have like high throughput of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation because a lot of like banks and things, they do a lot of manual things as well, and those bigger organizations. So if they wanted to adopt that, like, where do you draw the line for catering for those things?
But then maybe an extension here, or a consequence could be of this discussion, is to say that there's testing. Is it, if we say testing or if we're okay with those being top level events, we might also at some point think that we might have build related top level events and artifact related top level events, and then this becomes more a bucket of different sequencing of steps, like you said, Emil, where each step could refer to something in another top level event bucket, right? So it could be maybe we would, I don't know, at some point find a model more to define that relationship. So the actual integration events are just steps which then refer to subjects, predicates defined, or subjects defined in the other buckets. So we don't end up duplicating or having like misaligned duplicates in multiple buckets. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, so could the next step here be, based on this input and discussion, we do some processing on our end? And
One other thing I was just thinking about, maybe it's a detailed thing, but you mentioned test artifact there in your proposal, right? In the testing event. So we have artifacts already. When we perform a build, it results in an artifact.
yes,
I'm not sure, Andrea, do you remember what we have said about like log files from a build and such things? Are those okay to announce as artifacts as well, or does an artifact, for the output? So it could include a log file, maybe. I was just thinking, do we, if we would go that way, say that these are test artifacts, then we should maybe have the other ones called build artifacts instead. Or if they should just be artifacts, all of them.
yeah, you're right. We could extend this model to add some more metadata around content type and stuff like that. Just to, at least we did here, type and format. I don't know, I guess we could do similar if we want to reuse the existing artifact subject, but we could enrich in that model a little bit.
Yeah, that would be an event of its own as well then, I guess, right?
Yeah, I guess we're not explicitly limited artifacts to being certain things, What we discussed though is that we wanted to use the Perl format, so the package URL format for describing artifacts produced by a build.
Okay, is that mentioned? Sorry.
A link in the chat to the. So maybe you could have a look and verify whether that's something that you think could work for test artifacts. I think Perl is actually specific to packages. So whether it's a distribution package or whether it's a container image or some kind of npm, Maven, and so forth. So I think that's not meant to be used to describe things like log files or links to a video and so forth. But that said, we would probably then need some kind of, or we could have some kind of more generic artifact concept also for a build, because we might want eventually to include a link to the build logs as well. So it's yeah, I think it makes sense to have some artifact concept which is bound to software artifacts, because it has a more specific set of attributes that might not be relevant for other things. Like we're planning of introducing things like maybe SBOM signatures and this kind of things, and you won't have an SBOM for a log file, for instance. So it probably makes sense to have two type of artifacts. One artifact which is actually a package, software package type of artifact, and one artifact which is a more generic build test artifact.
Yeah, the logs are probably relevant for any kind of step in a pipeline, being it build or test or a release or deployment or some other kind of activity in the pipeline.
Yes, that said, I mean, from a build point of view, the logs are probably might be just the link to the logs might be just a field. I don't see that necessarily being a subject on its own, because I don't think that you from the build log you will do much automation. But for the test, if you have structured test results, and so you might want to have it as an artifact. Sorry, as a subject.
But are you suggesting that we add like a package or some kind of new subject with you can refer to with Perl, or a build artifact? So, or I don't know what you want to call it, which is kind of separate from this generic artifact, or should we just add a discriminator to this generic of kind of where we have a type?
No, I think the artifact as we have it today, it's more specific to software artifacts, really.
Okay.
So I think it makes sense to keep it independent, because we were planning of expanding it to add things like SBOM, software bill of material, and signatures and things like that. And those are really specific to software artifacts.
Okay, I understand. But then to Emil's point, should this be renamed to be more build artifact or something, just to be more explicit, or is that an unnecessary?
Or should otherwise what you call there a test artifact could be called a test output or test
Result, yeah.
record, test result. So we don't confuse it with artifacts.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, actually, because artifact is also, I mean, maybe somewhat misleading in that people might have conceptions about what an artifact is just because of what you just said. So maybe test output is a better name, or test.
Yeah, then we could maybe discuss sometime if we should have similar data formats of all log fields in our different events, for example. So if you would have a deployment log and a some kind of release log or something like that, should that those all logs be formatted, or the information about them in our events, should they be formed the same way, even though we might not have them as subjects then? We still would like probably to reference them using the same properties and so on. But yeah, we don't have any logs anywhere else, do we, Andrea? As attributes.
No, I mean, in the pipeline run and task run, I think you have a link, a URL that is not necessarily a log, but it's somewhere where you can usually see the logs of the pipeline run execution, but it's not mandatory on that. So it's somewhere where you can see the pipeline run or task run.
Yeah.
You typically include the logs.
But maybe should artifact maybe then be a core event, and like the generic artifact, and then build artifact be what you suggested with more specific to integration? Or
I'm trying to figure out what the use case is for like a generic artifact subject, as opposed to having just a link or an attribute into the other subjects, if it makes sense. So if you're saying like this test completion, this test suit was executed, and in the completed event, you could have an attribute that includes a link to the logs or other information.
One thing is where you can sometimes have, or often have, more than one, I guess. So you could have both an error log and a video recording of what, or a screenshot or multiple screenshots, depending on what you're using as a testing tool. So I guess you could have an array of artifacts, but then you'd miss out. I don't know if you want to have different content types for each artifact, so if it's video or whatever. So I guess you could embed all that in the finished event. Also, sometimes just from a synchronicity aspect or asynchronicity, it might take some time to create those videos or to make them available. So you might want to say that the case is finished, it failed, and then a minute later you'll get the event and here's a video of it, of the failure. So you don't have to wait for that to happen. Just depending on kind of once again, so many different tools work different ways. So that's kind of one of the reasons I think we put it out into a separate, or a couple of reasons why it's a separate object or subject.
Okay. Yeah, then my proposal would be, I mean, we could start with like test artifact as you proposed, and maybe we could consider renaming the other one to like a package artifact or some build artifact.
Here, yeah, sure. So would you want, should that be a separate change? Or would you, I mean, I'm happy to include all these changes we're discussing in the same PR, or do you feel like changing this one is more independent? Because you might want to change this name even, while the discussion on testing events continues.
Yeah, I would keep the change to the existing artifact, maybe separated, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, so I think, yeah, the main thing to me, I would prefer not to have two type of test case and test suits, because I think that would be confusing for adopters. So that's, I guess, the main feedback I would have on this. And then, yeah, so maybe move the existing and adapt it. And
should we just remove them from here then, and just, I mean, we can add a note that these have been moved to the testing events bucket. Or
yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay.
I think having a note could maybe help, but at the same time, it's fine to have them somewhere else. But maybe if people are used to seeing them here, we could have a note.
Yeah, I guess the other thing is the type does not include, should not include the sorry, it should not include the bucket, right? If I'm not mistaken, we set it up that way.
They no.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So like the event type is like dev.cdevents.subject.predicate.version.
Mhm.
So the fact that we document this events in a different bucket doesn't change the event type itself.
Oh, okay.
Does it make
I missed
sense?
that. Okay, well then, yeah, definitely, but definitely makes sense. I missed then this would have been a problem anyway. So then we should definitely remove it here, because then it would be, unless we kind of add the bucket to the ID of the event. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think that was on purpose because yeah, exactly. So this is one representation. The buckets is one representation of the events. But yeah, it's not. We didn't want to embed that representation in the event types.
Yeah,
to keep things more flexible.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So the other thing in the spec repo, we have JSON schemas.
Okay.
So if there is a schemas repo with a schema for each event.
Okay.
So when you go and update the schema of the events types, if you could update the schemas here as well. And for certain fields like test types, you could make an enum here in the schema if you wanted to. If you have like specific strings that you think it would make sense to have as part of the test type, for instance, you could have an enum added in here so that you actually formalize on these are the strings that needs to be used to identify a unit test or end-to-end test and so forth. And I think that would go a long way in terms of interoperability.
Yeah, I agree. It's just I made this not the type specifically. I just remember I've working with load testing. There's like stress testing, performance testing, load testing. You know, there's like 7-8 facets of load testing, and this can be like a heated discussion at a load testing conference. I didn't want to like, you know, make a put a stake in the ground. I'm happy to do an enum. I'm just I don't know, but I can do that. Let's see what happens. I mean,
I think it will be, yeah, there could be discussions on what the items to put in that enum then, which might delay this PR.
Ollie, did you say
that? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, did you say the load testing conference? I only go to the performance testing conferences.
Well, I'm just saying that, you know, there's like, you have these sessions about what's the difference between performance testing and load testing, stress testing and baseline testing, and you know, this and that testing. And then
I've been to some of them, they get quite crazy.
Yeah, they do. And then the same with functional testing. And so I don't want to get into I was being like, you know, Swedishly careful here, but I'm happy to put a stake in the ground and say these are and if people, we can extend that enum over time. So I'll do that.
And as you wish. I mean, it can also be an additional PR, and we can also do some like background research if you want to provide names used in the wild by different tools, and then we can come to an agreement on specific names. It doesn't have to be in the original PR, so I understand your concern there.
I mean, we can add this note specifically why we didn't add an enum, and then at least to explain why, if people wonder, because I'm sure.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. I hope we have enough to then for a next step.
Yeah, I can just add one more thing. We have in a relating SIG interoperability, there is a vocabulary work ongoing since years back, which is quite far from being done, but there are discussions there on names for different things.
Okay.
So there is a pipelines terminology document in there, for example, and there is also a what is it called now? Tools terminology document, but for this discussion is mostly for the pipelines terminology. And there are discussions there, for example, on what maybe not exactly what is a log, but it's mentioned there as generated software and generated binaries, which I think we should be aligned with whatever that vocabulary work ends up with. So eventually we might need to change these terms. But as they are not defined yet, they're not really set in stone what they should be. But it could at least serve as an input for this work as well. If you are thinking about what to call different things, that could be a good place to start looking.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for
I can share
mentioning.
the link.
Yeah, please share. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks again for your proposal and taking the leadership on this, guys. So it's much appreciated, and it's great to see you joining our meeting. And yeah, so look forward to the next step on this.
Okay, great. And the next, so to be specific there, then we'll try to incorporate all your feedback. And should we open like a draft PR and share it, or what would you suggest? Or should we wait till the next meeting?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say then we can iterate on more details on the PR if needed.
Thank you. Will do.
All right. We have only 8 minutes left. I wanted to say welcome, Yura. Sorry, we had trouble joining the meeting. We have a couple of things more in the agenda, but if there is anything that you want to bring up to this meeting today, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, not. I didn't want to put you on the spot. Okay. Maybe just a couple of comments on the incident. I don't know, we can have a long discussion because we only have a few minutes. We had some comments by Emil and by Andrew Meyer on the incident issue. So thanks for that. And it was good to see also contributions by Andrew, and always good to get new contributors commenting on things. So I guess the current proposal would be to start with a minimal data model based on the comments there, and also to have a formal definition of what the incident means. Thanks, Emil, for bringing that up. So I put some notes about what this could look like, and maybe if you have opinion about what incident events should look like, we could do it on the issues, or we could have a brief discussion. If anyone has a comment that they want to bring up here, we can do it quickly otherwise.
So just shortly, what we then mean with incidents, based on the discussion we had on the ticket there, Andrea, is that it's some kind of degradation of a service. So it's actually intended to be the base for a DORA metric, where it's either using this event, you could calculate the time to restore service or time between failures. I think it's called, right? Or something like that.
Yes, that would be by definition. So some degradation of a production environment as opposed to of like a software package specifically. So I would see it as something like performance degradation, response time, some kind of metric that you can define for your production environment, which is degraded, that triggers an incident. And then the incidents can be root cause and could be associated to, I don't know, a CV being exploited by someone that was doing the denial of service attack, or it could be due to some bug that has been discovered, or yeah, simply some higher usage of the system, or yeah, could be many different things. But then that said, I think it makes sense to model other things like issues as well. But I would keep it like as a separate discussion. All right. Yeah. Finally, I think Brad already mentioned this in the beginning, but the CFP for Silicon is open. It's going to happen in May next year in Vancouver. Yes, thanks, Brad. And there is an early bird that ends on January the 7th, which is tomorrow. And there is a later date for the CFP. I don't know if, Brad, you know by heart when that is. Otherwise,
February 20, I think, something like that. Still a while. Let me just quickly check.
February the 12th or 20th.
Give me 1 second. I'll update the HackMD when I find it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Well, if anyone has any more conference that should be under our radar, please bring them up or add them to the notes so we are aware.
It's 15. Yep.
Okay. Right. I don't think we have any other updates on Python SDK. Eric mentioned he could not be here. Maybe Brad, briefly, do you know if there's anything new on the Jenkins X side? Have you heard?
Yeah, I think everyone was on holidays, so they're just coming back. So there's a few people that have done a doodle poll for joining again. So the next meeting will be next week.
Alrighty. Okay. Any final remark from anyone?
I had a question. There's like a CDEvents meeting later today. Is that,
Yes.
what's that about? Is that some, I'm just curious who should be attending that for what purpose?
The intention there is to not discuss in depth details of the CDEvents protocol itself, but rather events in general. It could be
Okay.
outside CDEvents, the protocol as well. So it's more presentations on how events are used in other kinds of systems or other CD systems, which we might eventually relate to.
Okay.
So such more general event discussions are held there. And also some formalities as well.
Okay.
So you're very much welcome to join there as well.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining today. Great to see everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, likewise.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Bye,
Bye-bye.
friends.
See ya.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.